first thing to do to get this hub assembly off is we're going to take the dust cap off. Now note, this one has a grease fitting on it. These tractors never had a grease fitting in the dust cap. Somebody added this to keep pumping grease in here. First thing we're going to do, which one thing I can tell you it'll probably be easier if you do it, is to go ahead and knock this cap off while you still got the wheel on. See, it wants to roll, so it might fight me here. We'll see. Okay, it comes off. See, I don't know if you can pick that up on camera, but that bearing don't sound too good. And one thing I didn't do whenever I got down here was grab me a rag, because even without the grease fitting, these things are going to be covered in grease, so be prepared for that. Now I'm actually going to replace this bearing cap. Dennis Carpenter actually reproduces them, made out of cast steel, just like these originals. They're pretty nice. And they're cheap. Alright, let's get this grease off of here. At least enough to where we can work on it and see what we got. Well, the first thing you're going to run into is a cotter pin. So, let's bend our cotter pin. And get it out. Like I say, with all cotter pins, just replace them. Go ahead and take this nut off. Right now, there's no need to get this nut overly clean, and I'll show you why here in a second. Now, in here, first thing we're going to encounter is a washer with a notch in it. Now that notch is keyed to our spindle. So the next thing is what they call the outer bearing. It's this little guy right here. Now, this is just a temporary thing, but as you can see, there's another bearing in here called the inner bearing right there. There's also this dust seal. Now the easiest way to get this guy off is to take your nut and thread it back onto your spindle. Which I know you can't really see that right now because my hands and everything's in the way. But there we go. We're going to thread that on there. Now, you're going to pull it to where it catches. It may take a time or two. Oh. And you're basically going to use the nut, there we go, to pull the bearing and the seal out at the same time. And this hub is slammed full of grease. And you don't want these bearings hubs slammed full of grease, because you need room for the grease to expand thermally, for one. Second, it's just wasteful and messy. So our seal will be replaced and our bearing will be replaced. Probably the hardest part of this whole job is jacking the tractor up. Second hardest part is dealing with all the grease, because it is a bunch, especially whenever you have one like this that somebody has just pumped full of grease. And there's no need for that. There's, look at all the grease in there. That's way too much grease. inner bearing and seal. That's all there is to it to get the bearings off. And I went and got a cup just to see how much is in here. And I got me a glove. Alright, so that's probably the majority of what I can get with just my fingers. This is an 8-9 ounce cup. And it's pretty much full. I mean, if you think about it, a standard tube of grease is about 14 ounces. In this cup is probably about 7 ounces of grease. I mean, you don't need that much grease. I'll probably go ahead and try to clean this up a little bit before I knock the races out, just because it'll make it a little easier on me. Okay, so I got it cleaned up fairly decent. I mean, I'm probably going to clean it up some more, but I'm going to knock these races out of here now. And if you look inside your hub, which is going to be really hard to get this on camera, the rear bearing has these little notches cut out. There's 2 of them opposite each other, to where you could stick a punch in here and knock this race out. The front race does not, but you can get on the very edge of it and knock it forward. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to knock that rear race out. And that just gives me easier access to that front one. Okay, so there's the inner one out. And I'll go over the numbers whenever I go to pack them back and put them back and everything. But I will give you those numbers, so don't worry about that. Like I said, now I'm going to flip it over. And we'll knock out the outer race. And there's maybe a 1/16 to a 32nd inch lip around there of that bearing that we can get on to knock it out. So it's not a lot, but it's enough. And it'd help if my punch wasn't all mangled up. I might have to put a point on it real quick. Alright, so now I got a nice sharp punch. Tool maintenance. Saves you a lot of time and frustration. Okay, so there's the outer one. So now I just got to do a final cleanup, get it sandblasted, get it painted, and then I'll install the new races.
As I got the hub all sandblasted and painted, now it's time to start installing new wheel bearings. First thing we got to do is we got to press new races into the hub. You can use a press, you can use a hammer, you can use anything really. I would suggest you get a bearing and race installer kit that comes with these little aluminum pucks. These will actually fit the races, and you're less likely to damage them. As for the bearings themselves, like I said, I like using the Timken bearings. Your outer bearing is going to be set 2. You can look up that set 2 and it'll give you both the bearing and the race. As for the inner, it's going to be set 6. So we're going to take our race with our little installer, set it down into our hub. And of course mine's wanting to go crooked, go figure. Okay, straight up now. And just press it in until it's fully seated. And if you're hammering these in, you'll hammer it until you hear like a solid sound. And that means you're fully seated. So there's the outer race installed, and then the inner race installs the same way, it just has a larger adapter. Now this adapter here may get stuck. If it does, just knock it out from the other side. And there's the inner race installed. So now this is ready to be put onto the tractor with the bearings. Okay, so first thing we're going to do, since we've already got our new races in our hub, we got to pack our wheel bearings first, and then we got to install them, the inner one. But pack both of them at the same time, because I highly recommend you do this with gloves, because after you do 4 wheel bearings, and dragging these things across your hands are going to be very irritated. So go ahead and just wear gloves to do this. You can buy a wheel packer if you want to. I personally just do it by hand. It's not that hard. What you're going to do is you're going to take some wheel bearing grease. I'm using some Lucas Red and Tacky. I'm going to scoop some of it up and put it in your palm of your other hand. Which I'm right-handed, so I put it in my left hand. And you're going to take that bearing and just kind of go along the edge of the grease pile, kind of like stick it in and then scrape it off. This is why I say wear gloves, because this will irritate your hands. And you're going to do this until you see grease come up through the bearing rollers. And the first part you do takes the longest. You can kind of see them starting to come up right there. I know I'm doing this way off of camera because it's kind of an uneasy angle here for me. Once you see it to start to come up, just turn your bearing a little bit and keep on going. And just do that until you get the bearing push, or the grease pushed all the way up through the rollers all the way around. Okay, and you can kind of see I got little bumps of grease all the way around. So now what I always do is take some more grease and just kind of like pack it down on the top, and then I'll take and put some around the outside. And then I'll take our inner bearing, and I got the hub sitting here on the ground upside down, and I'll go ahead and drop that one into the hub. So now I'll take the little outer bearing and go ahead and pack it while I've got grease all over me. And now this bearing we're going to set to the side a second. So be sure you have something to lay this bearing on. So I basically just laid it back onto the box. Now you're pretty much done with the gloves, other than you'll get a little greasy installing them, but it's a whole lot better than packing the bearings. The next thing we're going to install is going to be the seal. And this is an NCA 1190A. Now this seal has no paint on it, so I always like to add just a little bit of RTV around the edge, just to make sure it gets a good nice seal around this edge here, like so. And then we'll just stick it into the hub. We'll go ahead and just tap that down into place. Now don't do this and set these hubs aside, because as you bolt this on, this seal will get pushed further into the hub. And of course the other side just fell right in. This side is going to have the hammer in. Go figure. Nothing works easy. Okay, so there's our seal installed. Now, before you put this on, take a little bit of your wheel bearing grease and put it on this edge of your seal. Otherwise it'll squeak when you drive. And I know it's a tractor, but trust me, it's annoying. So now, you'll slide your hub on until it seats that bearing. Take your outer bearing and slide it in. Next up is going to be the washer, and it has a little notch in it. Well, that notch will slide into the notch on the top of the spindle. Then we're going to install our castle nut. There is no torque spec for this. You're basically going to start tightening this up. And if you look right here, as I tighten it, you'll see the hub going backwards, pushing that seal further in to the hub. That's why I say do not silicone them and let them set. Okay. So now it's tight. Oh, something just bound up. Go ahead and tighten these down until they're snug where you can't turn it. Except for for a lot of drag. So now you're going to take and back this off. So that's half a turn. Still pretty tight. Let's go a quarter turn. Still fairly tight. Alright, so this is not too bad. It's still a little tight, but you want to tighten this until there's no wiggle in play, whatever you want to call it, but that it's tight enough that it'll spin. Or loose enough, I guess you could say. See, like that, that's too loose. You hear the noise it makes? That's too loose. Okay, so now I'm going to tighten mine just a hair more to line up a cotter pin keyway here. I just have an 1/8 inch by 2 inch cotter pin. I'm going to slide that in. We'll bend the legs up and around the nut and down and around the nut. So there's the bearings installed. The last thing to put on is the dust cap. Now on the dust caps, I like to put a little bit of silicone on the thread. And the reason I do that is because I do drive these tractors across creeks from time to time. And it's just one little thing I can do to make sure that water doesn't get to my bearings. But you could probably use thread sealer and everything like that. It'd be perfectly fine as well. Okay, so now that I have some silicone on the thread of my cap, we're just going to put that cap in there and tighten her down. And I like to just take, I know it messes up paint and everything, but you know, it is what it is. Just kind of hold that right there. Spin the hub just to kind of tighten it up a little bit. And like I said, I'll touch that up and it'll be no problem. So that's how you install the wheel bearings on these tractors. They're pretty simple. Hardest part's packing them and probably getting the adjustment. But just have it tight enough to where they turn, but not so tight that you can't easily turn it and burn your bearings up.